yeah. Oh, yeah. I love that intro. I'm not going to lie, Jamie. I really do love that intro. That's the first time I'm actually using it while recording because it is a brand new intro. So all the things we recorded previously can now be released because I finally have the intro. But ladies and gentlemen, this is the Ambiguous Podcast Solution. And I am your returning champion, Will Tarashuk, back for another riveting, exciting podcast. And my guest today is Jamie Goerke from the Touching Base PR Edition podcast. Touching Base is a motivating resource for all those looking to break into the public relations industry through fun and informative podcast episodes, including guests such as public relations professionals, founders, and more. Listeners will gain a better understanding of the PR industry and the steps to make their own mark within. Jamie, I gotta say, I've known a lot of PR people going to school at Hofstra University. But you know what? I've always asked the same question. What exactly is PR? So welcome. I'm very happy to get to ask you questions. And welcome to the podcast. How are you this evening?
I am good. And I loved that intro as well. I just made a new intro for my podcast a few months ago. And once it came out, I was totally vibing with it. They're definitely so fun. And I am so excited to be on here and talk to you all about PR and podcasting. And that was like one of the best intros I've ever been given. So thank you so much.
Oh, of course. You're welcome. And shout out to Q Recording Studios in Montclair, New Jersey. They are our partner who does all of our intros and editing if you need that kind of studio quality. If you're in the neighborhood and you need a studio recording quality, hit them up. Ambiguous Podcast Solutions is where you can find all that place. But yeah, I was like, I want a funky beat that makes my head go like this. Mm-hmm. And I gotta say, he really nailed it out of the park. So again, shout out to
definitely achieved it
for doing that. So did you make your intro yourself, or how would you do it?
So I do all of the stuff on my own. I use Final Cut Pro, and I kind of wrote down a script of what I wanted to say beforehand, recorded it. Like I was tried to be like so happy and like so like high pitched when I was making it. And then I kind of literally just found copyright free music and just kind of threw it under and called it a day.
Hey man, that's I gotta say I've done that multiple times for my podcast. And hey, copyright free is great as long as it stays copyright free forever. But we're not here to talk about music or how people make music. That's a whole nother podcast. But we're here to talk about PR. So tell me who you are, where you're from, and how you got into the world of PR.
Yeah, so my name is Jamie, and I am from Long Island, New York, born and raised. And then I currently work in athletic communications. I work at St. John's University, and I'm in this program where I am a graduate assistant. So I work full-time in athletic communications, but it's not technically a job. It's an assistantship. And in return for that, they pay for my master's degree. So I'm getting my master's degree in sport management in the time being. But I kind of stumbled into PR, and I think that my story into PR is kind of a little bit crazy because my whole life, I did not think there was any way I was going to end up in PR. I thought my entire life I was going to be a doctor, and I was absolutely dead set on being a doctor. And then I got to college. I went to Binghamton University, upstate New York, and I got there and I did the first year of chemistry and biology. And I struggled so hard. I was going to tutoring like 3 times a week, and I just like was getting C's on everything. And so then I came home that summer, and I was like, I do not know what I want to do. And I just kind of started throwing out so many different ideas. I was like, well, I like math. Like maybe I'll be a math teacher. I was like, I like makeup. I could just become a makeup artist. And then I've actually been really fortunate growing up that my dad is the official scorer for the New York Knicks.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Do you get free tickets?
We used to. We don't anymore, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a shame. That's a crime. That's a crime.
It really is. So then when I was in high school, I was kind of just hanging around one of the press rooms at MSG, and it was during a New York Liberty game. And my dad kind of turned to the press director and was like, do you guys need more hands? And she was like, we always need more help. So that was actually like my first job, was really working at Madison Square Garden, which is the coolest thing ever. I'm so fortunate to like have that opportunity, but I was doing sports PR there. And that was kind of what I do there, is kind of just running stats and like handling media relations. But when I was going through this career crisis, one of my friends was like, Jamie, are you dumb? You love PR. You've been doing it for 4 years now. Like, why didn't you just do that? And I was like, you know what? You're right. And so then that's kind of how I stumbled into PR and kind of how I stumbled into sports PR as well. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
So what exactly is public relations? Like when someone's like, I do PR, my first question is, what does that mean? What is it?
So PR is definitely can be misconstrued in a million different ways. And especially now with marketing and there's the whole influencer sphere, it's totally like no one really knows what PR is. So I think of PR is the unpaid side of communication. So it's kind of, so if you have a newspaper, the best example is if you have a newspaper and there's something written by a journalist in a newspaper about how they tried a product and they really enjoyed it, et cetera, that's free media. That was, you sent them a product, they reviewed it, they wrote it down. On the same newspaper, there could be an advertisement for a product that was paid for. No one reviewed that. It was just kind of paid for. So PR is kind of the free side, and then marketing is the paid side.
Yeah, I think of PR as it's always good news, right? Like your job as a PR rep is to make the company look as good as possible, or an individual as good as possible, highlighting the strengths. Am I 100%? How right am I on that statement?
I think that's 100% right. And the job of someone in PR is to kind of, I don't like the word manipulate, but it's to kind of manipulate the media into getting you the best image that you can put out there. So a job of a publicist is to have positive relations with the media. That way, say if a crisis story breaks, it's the job of the publicist to have a relationship with the media so you can kind of get to them before they break the story.
Yeah, we've all heard it. How can we spin this? The key word there is the spin. And I do think PR reps can sometimes get a bad rap as just like, how can you do PR for like an oil company, right? Like stuff like that, where it's like your job is just not to lie, but it's like you said, kind of like to mislead. But no, I mean, like, even like the Gates Foundation, right? They do a bunch of charities. Bill Gates gets a bad rap too, and sometimes he deserves it, but he also does these good things, which a PR rep does need to provide. So I think a PR rep in general, it's a tough job.
Yeah, it's like kind of this weird in between where you don't want to lie, but there's always a way to spin something in a positive way. And I think that's the biggest thing that I even tell people that like want to work in PR is like your first step is spinning yourself into the person that a PR agency wants to see. I always say, oh, you worked at a camp while you were in high school and you want to put that on your resume? Okay, you can kind of spin that around. You collaborated with parents to provide them the best image of the camp. Exactly.
Yeah, you manipulate words.
Exactly.
Now, do you find it hard to sometimes, like, I guess even in sports, probably not so much. That's the NFL. The NFL. But do you find it hard where like sometimes it's like, okay, morally, this is what happened, but I got to kind of present it in the best light possible. And how do you deal with something like that?
So it's definitely this weird in between because like, and I think the best example is like when a team isn't doing well, you still have to put them out there. It's like, it's not your job to be the media. It's not your job to critique the team. It's your job to get the clear facts out there. And so I think of this a few weeks ago, I work for the St. John's volleyball team. And a few weeks ago, we're in the middle of a game and our team starts off the set really poorly. And it ended up being 7-0, and we were on the O side. So we were at a timeout and I always tweet the score at timeouts. And I kind of looked at my coworkers who were sitting next to me and I was like, I can't push this out there. Like there's no way to make that positive.
Yeah.
And so then when I'm writing a release after the game to send out to the media, it's like, how can I say that they did this, but also try not to harp on that one? And you kind of really have to focus on getting out the best information and kind of just breezing over the parts that aren't so good.
Well, couldn't you say that, listen, like in that particular instance, it is good PR because it's the truth. They're losing. Like sometimes you just can't sugarcoat it. And if you're like, again, I'm going to use like a more serious example. Like sometimes you can't sugarcoat something, and your leaders, your response, the public will thank you for being honest, as opposed to trying to spin it. Because you hear it all the time. Oh, they're doing it just for good PR. They don't mean it. It's like, well, sure, but if someone's just like, listen, it's timeout 7-0. They may not think anything of it, but they definitely won't think bad about it. It's just the truth. The truth is always good PR, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's kind of definitely something that. Even I was in a class this semester because I'm also in a master's program, and we were talking about crisis control and things like that. And it's kind of your job as a publicist. You want to be in control. You need to provide the media with the facts so they don't go digging for it. Mm-hmm. You need to give them the information that they need to have. That way you're the one in control of the narrative.
Mm-hmm. All right. We could go on and on about that, but I want to ask the typical trait of a PR rep. Now, I'm thinking structured, neat, on time, and like very friendly, in like that kind of realm. Definitely structured in like a very strict schedule. So like, is that true? Like, what do you think the typical traits of a successful PR rep are?
So I actually do not think that a PR rep needs to be structured, because the job of PR is kind of around the clock. It's not like a 9-to-5 kind of job. I know there are days where I walk into my office at 2:00 and I don't leave until midnight. So the job is really, really different depending on every single day. Okay. So I think the most defining trait, and I was talking about this in an episode with someone a few weeks ago, is there's this kind of personality around PR, and you have to be very sociable. You have to be confident in the story that you're putting out. You could be the most introverted person on your own, but you have to be extroverted for your client, and you have to be personable with the media and friendly and communicative. And that's kind of the biggest thing. And I know like PR is under the realm of communications, but it really is so true that you have to be communicative, because that's kind of the biggest part of your job is communication.
You consider it a lifestyle?
I would. Yeah. Okay. PR is a lifestyle.
That's very interesting. I like that though. That's very interesting. How about do you consider them entrepreneurs in a way? Because yes, they are. Even if they work for a company, but can a PR rep work for themselves and be their own, I guess, one-man firm or one-person firm or something like that? Is that possible?
Yeah. So there are definitely PR firms that are only run by one person. And I know specifically this was a couple of years ago when I did one of my first PR internships. I was interning for a woman, and it was her company. And then the only other people on staff were me and 2 other interns at the time. So she was really the face of this industry. And so she was the face of her firm. So it's really not just about, at that point, PRing your clients. You have to PR yourself. Why am I the best person to serve you, etc.
Right.
And I think like that's kind of almost the hardest thing about being in PR is your own personal brand. And I know when I went through a podcast rebrand a few months ago, and I had to hire someone to help me with graphics and our branding book, because I simply I could not figure out, I come up with brands every day for people. I tell everyone else's story, and I could not tell my own story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, see, that would drive me crazy, because the only reason I podcast is to tell my stories, right? Like this one, I say this all the time, this podcast, I podcast for personal growth. This one is so I can get to know podcasters, what they do, why they do it. My other one's a wrestling one where it's just I love to talk about wrestling. Still very personal. I'm telling my own stories. So do you use your podcast to tell your own stories? Even because if you can't do it in your professional life, you might as well do it on your own podcast.
Yeah. And I definitely use my podcast in that way. The way I kind of structure my podcast is I spend about the first 5 minutes and I talk about a personal and professional highlight from my week. And then my podcast is focused entirely around interviewing other people in PR. And that was also my biggest thing when I was coming up with the concept for my podcast. I was like, I don't think I could sit down and just talk to a camera and talk to a microphone for 40 minutes.
It's hard.
I just don't think I would be able to do that. And so I was like, I want to have a podcast, but I want it to be sustainable. And I know I could talk to a microphone for maybe 20 minutes every once in a while, but I definitely couldn't do it every week.
It's hard. It's for me, some people it's very easy. For me, it's very hard. But I will tell you, if you want to get better at podcasting in general and touch yourself up as a host, try it. Just try it. You don't even have to release it, but at least try it, listen to it, because that's how you're gonna get better. That's gonna make you better with your guests. You're gonna think about different things. So like I'm doing it. I haven't released any of them yet, knock on wood, but I'm doing it. I recorded about 8 of them. I took a little bit of a break, but I'm gonna go back to it. I'm doing it because it's difficult, because it's gonna make me better. Consider I'm doing it for my own PR, hyping myself up.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely the biggest thing. And it's with everything, it's practice makes perfect.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. So you're looking to go into a career in PR and social media with a focus in athletics. So why athletics? Why? Like, I know your dad works at MSG. Super jealous, by the way. That's really cool. But why did you want to work specifically in athletics? I mean, athletes always need good PR. Sports teams always need PR. I mean, everyone needs good PR. But what made you want to go specifically into athletics and any specific sport?
Yeah, so I definitely think that working in sports is kind of this, every day is so different and so unique because some days are game days, some days aren't game days. And with athletics, like everything is constantly changing. And especially with college athletics, I work in so many different sports that my day is so different every day. And I'm definitely the type of person that cannot sit still. So that was kind of what drew me into sports PR. And then my major focus one day, like I'm in athletics right now doing college athletics, but one day my goal is to have my own PR firm that's structured just around athlete branding and like a personal brand, and kind of focusing on the influencer marketing sphere as well. So this is kind of just like my stepping stone into that.
No, I think that's very smart. So you have a magic wand, dream job, you get it tomorrow, no questions asked. What's the job?
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely having my own firm, but I always think it'd be so cool. I would love to one day work for the Yankees in socials. And this is a story I always like to tell people, is that one day I'm going to go into a Yankees interview and they're going to ask me, oh, is there anything else like you want to add at the end of an interview? Because they always ask that question. And I'm going to tell them, some people can say, oh, I was born for this role, but I truly believe I was created for that role. And I say that because it's actually so funny. My brother and I are a year and 3 months apart, a year and 3 days apart. And everyone asks me, how did that happen? And I was conceived the night the Yankees won the World Series in 1998. So that is my claim to fame. That is, I'm going to go into an interview with the Yankees and I'm going to tell them I was created for this role.
I'm going to cut that. That's a great clip. That's amazing. Because me being a huge Yankee fan, that's incredible. 98, that was a hell of a year for the Yankees. That's for sure. I was 3 years old. I don't remember, but I've seen the highlights. All right. So podcasting. I tell people all the time, like I go to a networking event and I'm talking to like, lawyers, real estate people, whatever industry they're in. They go, why should I have a podcast? I go, a podcast is a voice for your brand or business. A podcast is literally PR for your business. So talk to me about the relationship between public relations and how a podcast can be used in public relations.
Yeah. So the podcast part of PR and what a podcast is. So I think that so much of PR, like I've been saying, is it's free media. And it's kind of, how are you telling a story? And I think that's the thing with a podcast, is a podcast is telling a story. A podcast is saying, this is what I have, this is what we can provide. And the great thing about a podcast is that you can do it for free. And so a podcast is a way for a company owner to kind of say, this is my story, this is what we're doing, and this is why you should listen to it. And I think that especially with something like a product, people don't really just buy products anymore. People want to know, why am I buying this product? And I think that's why influencer marketing works as well, because there's a story around the product. People are buying into stories now. They're not buying into, oh, I can buy a makeup brush or something. They're asking the story of why. And that's what a podcast is doing. A podcast is telling the story.
Yeah. Have you ever bought something like off that was advertised on a podcast or a YouTube channel?
So I definitely feel like I have. And I was big into the YouTube beauty guru scene back in like 2013. That was like how I kind of got started with building a personal brand around myself. I made makeup videos back in like 2013. And so I definitely started buying products just based on what everyone was telling me to buy. So I definitely think it works. And I feel like I am like a prime example of that it works.
Well, it definitely works. Now, someone was telling me not too long ago that like the buy rate on ads via podcasts is pretty high in comparative to other forms of media. And I'm thinking to myself, why? So then I go, okay, well, what did I buy off a podcast? I bought Raycon earbuds. I needed Bluetooth earbuds, and they're a phenomenal product. You know, I bought like shampoo or a razor for my beard that needs trimming, right? Like stuff like that. But I'm thinking, okay, why did I buy these things? Well, yeah, because it was advertised me on a podcast, but because I trust the person on that podcast. I listen to that person. I feel like I know that person.
100%.
I feel a connection with that person. And that's just, as we say in the business, it's good PR.
Exactly. And I think what is so also that the ad rate on podcasts is so high because I think partially it's due to, so if you're watching a YouTube video, 9 out of 10 times you're able to click the little skip button and skip the ad. And it's so easy and so convenient. And I think that most people listen to podcasts in the car while they're driving. And it is so inconvenient to have to scroll over to your media tab, find like the 30-second skip button, skip through, but you have to listen to some of the ad because you're not going to get it perfect. So I definitely think that's part of it, is that it's something you can't skip through. But I also think that podcasting, because it's something that we've been able to integrate into our lives, it's not as much of a commitment as watching a YouTube video because it's something like I can just have playing in the background. It's like you really feel like you're becoming friends with that person. You really feel like you're creating a conversation with that person. And so it makes that person seem almost more credible than just watching someone on YouTube.
Yeah, you feel like you trust them.
Exactly.
Like, it's like literally like we're talking right now into this microphone. This is going like I'm wearing headphones. If you're wearing headphones, my voice is going straight into your ears, directly into the brain. Like it's a very different form of media. Where if you're watching TV, you're on your phone, you know, you got a pill medication. You got a medication because Big Pharma loves ads on TV. You know, you're not going to buy it because there's side effects that are going to make you blind, right? Whereas a podcast is like, oh, MeUndies. Well, crap, I kind of need some undies. What do you know?
Yeah.
A promo code, 50% off my first order. Let's do it. Right? It's just, and that's all part of what a podcast can be for a business or a brand. So when you're doing PR, okay, let me ask you this. Are you pushing or have you pushed for St. John's in your department to start a podcast? Like, does the St. John's communications department have a podcast network?
So they actually used to have a podcast. I know the athletic communications had one last year, kind of before I started. And then the interesting thing about the athletics offices is that majority of us are graduate assistants. So there are full-time staff members, but so many of us that just like exist in the department are graduate assistants. So there's so much turnover every 2 years. Every year, people turn over their positions to new people. And so it's definitely something that I would love for the athletic communications department to bring back their podcast. But in order to do that, I need to like do my own research on what they used to do first and kind of pitch my own spin on it and how we're going to do it. But I definitely think that it is something that every brand should have if they have the resources to do it.
Definitely. Okay. All right. So let's talk about your podcast. Let's talk about your brands and what you do outside of your regular 9-to-5 job. So how did you get the idea to start your podcast, Touching Base PR edition? So was it your idea? Was it someone else's idea? Tell me through the origin story.
So it was probably about a year. And I was like, I really want to have a podcast, but like I kind of said earlier, I don't think I could talk to a microphone for that long. I just don't think I would do it. I don't think it could be sustainable. At one point, my mom and I were like, maybe let's start a podcast. But then I was like, what would we talk about? every week. My friend Becca and I were like, let's start a podcast. And she was like, what should we talk about? And I was like, honestly, I don't know what we would talk about every single week. And so then quarantine kind of happened. And I think so many people kind of started their own endeavors during quarantine because we all had the time for it. Mm-hmm. But quarantine kind of happened and it was literally the middle of July. And I was like, I really want to have a podcast. I was like, so many people started asking me questions about PR because my school didn't have a PR major. So everyone saw me kind of doing PR and they were like, well, how are you doing it? And people started asking me questions about so many different aspects of PR. And I was like, well, maybe I could talk about that in a podcast. And then I was like, oh, well, I've connected with so many people in PR already. Maybe I was doing informational interviews like for myself. And I was like, well, maybe I should just broadcast those. And so then it was literally a Thursday and I walked around my entire house and I was like, does anyone have a microphone? And everyone in my house looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, why would we just have a microphone? And I was like, all right, so no one has a microphone. I went on Amazon Prime. Mm-hmm. I found a microphone that would be there on Saturday. And I said, okay. And then I started an Instagram account for my podcast. And I came up with the name Touching Base PR Edition because I felt like so many times in PR when I was pitching people, I was always saying like, hey, I just wanted to touch base with you on this. And so I came up with the idea touching base because I'm like, I'm going to be touching base with people in the PR industry. So that was where that touching base came from. So I made this Instagram account. I made a really, really crappy little episode logo cover. And I posted it on Instagram and I said, episode coming Sunday. And so then I spent Friday kind of writing down a little bit of a script for what I might say in this episode. Microphone came on Saturday. I sat down, recorded this little 5-minute trailer. And the next thing I knew, I had a podcast.
It really is that easy. Like,
it really is.
I love asking people what their origin story is because it's like, damn, it's so much easier than mine. I started in February 2015. It was around my birthday. It was like a few days before I turned 19. I recorded my first episode incorrectly, by the way. Well, it wasn't incorrect. So my computer wasn't strong enough to handle Adobe Audition, so the audio was skipping. So I was so bummed. I almost quit. I almost quit then and there. But it really is that easy to start a podcast. Now, were you surprised that it was that easy? Were you expecting it to be harder?
I think I was expecting it to definitely be a little bit harder. I was like, wait, you're telling me I can just upload audio to this website and all of a sudden my podcast, my voice is going to be on Spotify? I was like, that makes zero sense. But all right, if you're telling me that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And, I think it's like this thing where like I made YouTube videos for a while before I started podcasting. And I was making these YouTube videos and they go on YouTube and then you hope someone sees them. But with podcasting, it's like you make a podcast and all of a sudden it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, like it's all over the place. And I feel like it's just it's so different.
It is a different medium. And like, all right, as a PR rep, let me ask you this, because one of my philosophies, I have many philosophies on podcasting, but one of them is that everything needs to be everywhere always, which means everything you create needs to be in many places as possible as often as possible.
Yeah.
So like with a podcast, it's on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google. I know you use Anchor. Anchor doesn't give it everywhere. Like I know I distribute my podcast manually. We create our own RSS feed to distribute manually to 25 plus different places worldwide. I think Anchor gives you 7 or 8, but I know Anchor doesn't go to Stitcher, which really annoyed me. But then you can take the feed and manually submit it to Stitcher. So at least they give you that option. But it gave me the idea that exclusivity is dead. Like there's no such thing as exclusive unless you're Joe Rogan.
Oh, 100%. If I open up a news article and it is like, oh, you have to subscribe to this site, I'm like, oh, guess I'm not reading this news article.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because I was finding on a podcast. But especially with social media, do you do video for your podcast?
So it is something I've considered. But I am the biggest advocate of like, if I wouldn't watch it, I don't want to publish it. And I cannot if I see podcasters like on YouTube all the time and I like see these videos and I'm like, there's no way I'm just going to sit through a 45-minute video of you talking. Like I need to see other things going on. So I do not do video just because it's not something I would personally watch.
That's fair. I mean, I force myself to watch these. So I'm like, we're recording this on Zoom. I got to throw into our graphics package afterwards. I got to watch it again for clips. I got to watch it again for this. I'm going to end up watching this back like 5 different times. I'm just so numb to it at this point. But back to my point about exclusivity, because one thing I deal with is live streaming. Like eventually, this podcast is going to be live. I have the capabilities to do it. It's just, it's a pain, and I need to make it, I almost have the capabilities to do it. But when you go live, I want to go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn wants you to go there exclusively. If I want to go to Twitter, Twitter wants me to go there exclusively. Facebook, they want you to go there exclusively. I'm just like, you guys don't understand that that's not how new media is. Podcasting is the newest media where everything is available everywhere, and it's shared everywhere. And if you're going live in one place, you got to go everywhere because that's where the people are. The people are literally everywhere.
Exactly. And exclusivity is so dead. I even remember so with athletic communications, there's so many different platforms that you can go ahead and put your game streams on. And I know like some, like with us, our basketball games get streamed to Fox. Fox does that because we have a decent basketball team. But our other sports, we're kind of responsible for pushing them out, and we kind of get to choose where we want to broadcast them out to. And so
everywhere.
Sometimes we pick ESPN3, and then we have a partnership with ESPN3, but then our athletic conference has a partnership with Flow Sports, which is another streaming platform. And then some schools choose to do it on their own. And it gets to a point where I'm like, why am I on so many different streaming services to watch a volleyball game in 4 different places? I'm like, it gets to a point where I'm like, I don't want to just watch these games anymore. Like, I don't want to pay for it.
Yes, put YouTube. It's free.
Exactly.
So, do you have any podcast inspirations for your podcast? Like, anyone you draw inspiration from? Like, I draw inspiration from Joe Rogan. I draw inspiration from a wrestling podcast I've listened to since day one. Any inspirations for you?
So I definitely, when I started listening to podcasts, mostly, I started listening to the podcast Gals on the Go, which is 2 YouTubers, and they started making this podcast. And at a certain point, there was just one of the girls on the show, and I just can't stand her anymore. So I only listen to the solo episodes for the other girl now.
Fair enough.
Or when she's like interviewing someone else, I'll listen to it. I'm very into YouTube influencers who then make podcasts, because I'm so invested in like the influencer sphere, and I really love influencer marketing. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts that influencers put out. And so one of the ones I love is I Love You So Much with Kenzie Elizabeth. And what I love about her podcast is that she does interview so many other guests. It's like not your typical influencer podcast, but she also then integrates being an influencer, and she'll do like influencer book club every month where she'll have another girl on and they'll talk about a book that their audience could have read, or she'll integrate parts of being an influencer, but it's mainly focused on interviews. And that's kind of really what I'm into, because I'm this person where I cannot do the same thing over and over again. And that's why I have to listen to podcasts that are like just based on interviews, because I get bored listening to one person.
And you learn a lot by listening. Now,
yeah.
Do you consider yourself an influencer?
So I do and I don't. So okay. I started making YouTube videos back in 8th grade. And at that point, I was telling myself, I am an influencer. That is who I am. And at a certain point, it was like, I wasn't an influencer, that I wasn't making money off of things. I wasn't really getting a lot of brand sponsorships. It just like wasn't a thing that was happening. And I was like, can I really call myself an influencer if I'm not influencing people to buy things or do things or whatever? Like, I think that's where the whole term influencer came from. So I do consider myself an influencer, because I think that so much of what I do is what people associate with influencers, with podcasting, YouTubing, doing all those things. But at the heart of who I am, I think I'm really a content creator and a storyteller.
Yeah, okay. I feel the exact same way. There are people out there, Jared, I'm looking at you. Jared, I'm looking right at you in the camera, who want me to be an influencer. And I'm just like, it's so not me. Hey guys, Will here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, here's new products. That's not me. That's totally not me. Now, I don't have a problem being influential. If I influence you to start a podcast, that's great.
Exactly.
But am I an influencer? I don't want that responsibility. It's not my job to raise your kids. You know what I mean?
It's like there's so much talks around what is an influencer, what is not an influencer, and the term influencer gets thrown around a lot, and I think oftentimes it's getting thrown around in a negative way. And I was writing a paper yesterday on name, image, and likeness rights for college athletes, and now college athletes are allowed to profit. And I think we're going to see a lot of college athletes in the next few years start to become influencers and start to see what they're doing.
Oh, what have we done? Continue. I'm sorry, continue.
I mean, I really think like at the heart of it is being genuine, creating a story. And I think that that's something I tell college athletes, I'm like, for so long, being a college athlete was guarded because people weren't going on social media and sharing, hey, this is what my life is like as a college athlete, because they couldn't profit off of it. And so I think that athletes can start profiting off of themselves, just being natural, sharing their lives. People are going to want to see that. And as long as they stick to the idea of, this is who I am, I'm just sharing my story. Yeah, you can throw in brand sponsorships here and there, but they have to be authentic things that you use every day. It has to be an authentic partnership. Otherwise, no one's going to buy it. And I think if you're telling an authentic story, that's what's going to keep you as a storyteller. That's what's going to keep you as a content creator. But then we kind of end up in this sphere a lot of the time where people take on too many brand deals and it's not authentic anymore. They lose their credibility. And that's why the modern day influencer, I think, is kind of dying.
I never even thought of that college athletes are going to become influenced. Now they can make money off their brand. It's like, oh, you're just opening a door to literally make them like anyone else who's an influencer. I was like, oh, they can sell, they can make money off their t-shirts. They can sell merch.
They can do this, etc. But
it's a whole nother world that I was just like, oh, duh.
And it's this idea of when it first came out, so many athletes were like, oh, I play volleyball at a small Division I school. I can't make any money off that. Only football players are going to make money. And I'm like, oh, but you can.
It's like, start a podcast.
Start a podcast. Start a YouTube channel. Dance on TikTok. Do something.
Yeah. Now you can. Now you're allowed. Go ahead. It's capitalism at its finest. Go make it work. You can't make the money. If you say I can't make the money, guess what? You're not going to make the money.
Exactly. And that's what a lot of college athletes, they thought, oh, July 1st, I can make money. All right, payday is coming. And I'm like, no. Unless you are a major athlete that is going to be like the number one draft pick one day, you ain't selling merch. You're not selling your skills. You have to sell something else, sell who you are. And that takes effort. Yeah.
I mean, they might make a little bit. It's not going to be enough to like pay off their loans, but they might, well, that's on a ride, but they might make something. But you're right. The most successful ones are the ones who are going to be successful anyway. It really is just making them earn money faster, which, hey, I fully support. Like I was so glad that law passed that now they can make money off their name, because the NCAA, God love them. I love their college sports. March Madness, I'm there first. But you're stealing money from these kids and exploiting these kids. Now they get a chance to make some back. And like you said, it's an opportunity. And you're gonna see a lot more influence. Is that a good or bad thing? We'll see. But money will be flowing. So let me ask you, with your podcast, is it more of a passion project or a business? It can be both, but it's not 50-50. It leans one way or the other.
So right now it is a passion project. I am hoping one day that it is a business, but not because I don't want it to be a passion project, but because I want to expand beyond just a podcast. And because I'm in this space where it's PR and I'm kind of inspiring people with their PR journeys, I want to be able to provide more resources, and I want to be able to have panels and mentorship programs and things like that, where it's gonna end up one day looking more like a business on how to get into PR. But I always think at the heart of it, the podcast is going to be this passion project.
How long do you think you're going to continue to podcast?
It's a really good question. And I don't know, because there's some days where I'm like, I don't know if anyone wants to talk to me anymore. But then there's some days where all of a sudden I'm pitching people and everyone's like, oh my God, yes, like, let me be on your show. So it's like that answer changes every single day.
It's going to have the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows. But hey, you've made it this far. Like, most people would have quit by now because you started during the pandemic. Most people did quit by now. They're gone. They're not coming back. But you're still here. So that means something. Now, actually, it's a question I've never asked before. It just came to my head. Especially in a communications and PR realm, a podcast for an employee can be a liability.
Yes.
If you were offered a job, but you had to give up the podcast, would you do it?
I would not. And I think that I am the type of person where telling a story and being my own brand has been some part of me for so long. And it's what has shaped me into the PR professional I am today. And if I didn't know how to tell my own story, I wouldn't be able to tell anyone else's story. So if any company asked me that and told me I couldn't tell my story anymore, I would say, then I can't tell your story.
Yeah, I respect that. I respect that a lot, especially for me, starting Ambiguous Podcast Solutions. It's a risk. It's always a risk starting a company, especially with goals as lofty as ours. But I couldn't do this at a full-time job that I have on the table. And I am leaving a lot of money and a lot of benefits on the table and be able to do this. Because to me, podcasting is priceless. So yeah. I respect the hell out of that answer because it's not easy and you got to stick to your guns and you got to do exactly what you want. And the fact that you're starting out as a passion project in hopes of becoming a business, even if it's a secondary income, that's still a business. Every podcast is a business, whether you know it or not. A very smart man once told me that. I believe it was on his podcast. So I applaud you on that one because it's not easy. It's definitely not easy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely this thing that we're seeing now where a lot of people are starting YouTube channels or they're starting podcasts and they're like, I'm going to make money right away. And then they don't make money right away. And then it fails.
Takes a long time.
And it takes time.
It's a long time.
Once you've invested so much time and so much energy and so much research into it, I wouldn't be able to say like, I'm going to stop this just because you want me to.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, but it's supposed to be hard. Like starting a podcast was easy, but it couldn't have been all easy. What was the hardest part of getting started?
The hardest part of getting started is definitely, I think, just doing it. And like we've already kind of said, making the episode, getting it out there, that was easy. Easier than you think it would be. But actually getting up there and saying, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm going to order this stuff. This is what we're going to do. That's the hard part, the conceptualization of it and the putting it into your head that it's something that's going to happen. And that's my biggest thing. I'm like, if you want to do something, just do it. If it fails, it fails. But at least you said you tried. Yeah.
I'd say be careful. If you're going to do it, be careful. So what challenges do you have today? What's one of the hardest parts of doing a podcast at this very second?
Yeah, definitely it's finding guests to record with and then scheduling with them. And especially I interview a lot of PR founders and a lot of brand CEOs. And so they have time in their day to be like, yep, I want to record at noon. And I'm like, well, I work a full-time job. So I actually can only record with you after 5 p.m. So can we do that? And then I find a lot of people, it's just so hard to schedule with them just because my job is so unpredictable. And some days I get out at 4:30 and then some days I get out at 8 p.m. And there's so much unpredictability with my schedule that it's so hard to actually find time to sit down and record with guests. And so I found myself in the past few months, there's been times where I've skipped a week of an episode, or we're actually kind of on a little bit of like a 6-week hiatus right now where I was like, I just need to sit down, take the time to actually find guests and record with them, and then come back stronger than ever. And just recognizing that, yeah, you can pause, but then you'll get back right up. You'll get back up on the horse.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing a season format. I've spoken to that's something I never thought of with the podcast, because I was like, oh, all the podcasts I know are, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or they just kind of do it whenever. But a season podcast is something that was very new over the past few years that really took me by surprise, especially with how popular they are.
Mm-hmm.
Season podcasts is just like, well, okay, it's traditional media, sure. But I just keep thinking of podcasts as new media. It's something completely different that people don't fully understand because it hasn't been around long enough. And it's been around, podcasting's been around since 2006, if not earlier, but it's still a developing space. So, I mean, seasons format is definitely something you can do, but you got to keep an audience engaged in between seasons.
Exactly. And that's where social media kind of comes into the play, and PR on its own kind of comes into the play. You don't have these episodes to promote anymore. So what are you promoting in the downtime?
Yeah, you did. That's a natural transition, but I do want to backtrack one quick second. Now, if you're having trouble finding guests, why not students? PR students at St. John's.
Yeah, and so there's definitely this weird balance between that and then interviewing people that are already established. And I feel like when it comes down to interviewing PR students versus interviewing established people, it's kind of this, they're very different formats.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really haven't explored the student realm yet. And it's definitely something that I want to do. But I think in the beginning stage of the podcast still, where I'm kind of, my show is supposed to be kind of inspiring people to get into PR, and I have these people sharing their tips, I feel like it would kind of be a weird transition right now, but it's definitely something I want to explore in the future.
No, I understand that. But if you have trouble finding guests, maybe it's time to expand a little bit. Because if I was interviewing a PR student for a podcast like yours, I would be like, okay, what are your classes like? Do you feel like they're helpful? I've spoken to PR agents. Here's how they use it in real life. Like, you're all helping the students, and people who are listening can still be inspired to go into PR.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
A high school student is listening. I'm a senior in high school. I want to do PR. Oh, this is a student at St. John's. I got into St. John's. Ooh. Or, reverse it. You have a perspective from a student. You go back to a PR professional and go, hey, this is what students are learning in school. Is this applicable to your real life?
Yeah.
Like they can work very much hand in hand, but I totally understand that you want to stick to the script. But
it's always good to branch out, and it's always good to try new things, because even like I just said, if you don't try it, you'll never know if you could have done it or if it would have failed.
Yeah, you'll figure it out. I have confidence you'll figure it out. But
Thank
you did mention social media. Because social media is PR. 1,000%. Social media is essentially just PR with a mouthpiece.
Yes.
So talk to me about what PR is like for your very own podcast.
So for my own podcast, I've definitely struggled a lot with social media and struggling with what I want to put out and what I want to do. In the current place that we're out, I post an episode graphic every week with like a picture of our guests and kind of talk a little bit about it. And then my other main thing is something that I do where I say it's #TipTuesday, and I kind of share a quote from the guest that week. And then the other, I always post the graphic, the Tip Tuesday graphic, and then I post kind of 2 more photos in between, just to break it up, and so it looks kind of like a checkered board on my feed. But those 2 posts can be anything from, here's a guest we had, this is what they're doing now, here's what I'm up to, this is what PR looks like for me. And that's definitely something that I'm looking to expand and work on, is that I want to integrate more video, and I want to integrate more of the actual podcast into the social media platform. Whereas currently, like right now, it feels like it's just about me. But PR for podcasts and social media for podcasts is, I think, the easiest way for someone to get the word out right away that they started a podcast, because there's hashtags, and if you know how to kind of work the algorithm a little bit, you can gain followers pretty quickly, and you can create a pretty niche audience right away. And then I also use social media to pitch guests, where I reach out to guests on their own social media. And I'm just like, I reach out to companies and I'm like, hello, is there anyone like from your company that would want to talk to us? I reach out to people that have established PR social medias and I'm like, hey, do you want to come on and talk? And so I kind of use PR as I use social media as my pitching tool, and I use social media to promote my show, but I always think there's room for improvement.
There's always room for improvement. I bet you're very successful on LinkedIn.
I love LinkedIn, but I need to use LinkedIn more.
All right, so which platform is the most effective?
Instagram right now.
Instagram, yeah. Young people, yeah. Instagram. I love Instagram. I don't love it. I love the memes on Instagram. I use Instagram for two things: sending memes to my friend and texting my girlfriend. That's it. That's all I use it for. The occasional obligatory post like, "Hey, here's my beer" or whatever. So which platform is the hardest to manage?
So right now I kind of really only do Instagram, and then I post things on like my personal LinkedIn about the show. Mm-hmm. And then every once in a while, if I have a really good episode, I'll post it on my personal Facebook for people to see. But I think Instagram is definitely the hardest platform to manage. And I think that this is for literally everyone, because Instagram changes every single day, because Instagram is this platform where they are just a copycat platform of every other platform. It was, Reels started because people were going over to TikTok. Stories started because people were posting Snapchat stories. Instagram just pulls everything from other platforms. And so every day on Instagram, it might be, oh, your feed is chronological now. Oh, no, it's not chronological anymore. We're actually just going to promote creators that use these new tools. But actually, if you take your TikTok and then you post it on Instagram, we're not going to promote that because we'll see the little TikTok watermark, and we don't want that. So Instagram is the most confusing platform to actually go get popular on, because it changes every single day.
That's good to know. So as someone who works in PR, how do you navigate different algorithms? Obviously, I mean, no one really knows the algorithm or fully understands the algorithm, because that's $1 billion secret. But how do you navigate algorithms? Because it's next to impossible.
And the only thing that I have learned about navigating the algorithms is that the only thing that I can really be in control of is consistency. I cannot control what they're going to push day to day, but I can control the idea that if I post once a week, or if I post 2 times a week, or however many times a week I post, as long as I am consistent with what I am doing, something is going to get out there.
Now, your content is not by any means controversial, but are you at all concerned about social media censorship for your content in particular? I'm not talking like politics here.
Yeah, it's definitely something that everything can be construed in one way or another. And especially, I feel like during COVID, everything was so sensitive, or even now it's like, if you post a photo of you at a concert, people are going to be like, well, did you get tested before the concert?
Yeah.
And like, you're never going to please everyone. And so the biggest thing I've learned is just like, you have to be true to who you are. And as long as you're true to who you are, maybe you won't have 1 million followers, but the people that are following you are going to be interested in what you have to say.
Are you on TikTok?
I am.
I refuse. TikTok scares me. All right, I'm good at making content, right? I'm good at making podcasts. I'm good at cutting clips. I'm good at whatever, audio. I'm like, I look at TikTok and I go, how do these people make these things? I don't understand. I'm not that old. I'm turning 27 in February, right?
Yeah.
I'm not that old. I should be able to figure it out, but it's a mystery to me.
So the biggest thing with TikTok is that the TikTok algorithm really likes someone with a super duper duper specific niche. So, for example, I stand there and I can post funny videos about my life, but it's not specific. And I always say, I'm like, my niche on TikTok was being a dumb bitch, but apparently that's not niche enough for TikTok.
There's plenty of dumb bitches out there.
Right. So then my friend goes out there and she's like, I love Greta Van Fleet. And she's like, I am just going to post TikToks about Greta Van Fleet. And all of a sudden she has like 2,000 followers. And I'm like, I don't understand.
Huh. God, I am learning. Okay. What's the secret of Facebook? I'm just gonna keep digging here. I'm learning so much.
Honestly, I don't understand Facebook, and Facebook is gonna die one day. But I think the biggest thing on Facebook that people can do is get into groups. And I think that's what you have to do on Facebook is get in groups and promote to a specific niche on there. It's all about the niche.
I will with Twitter. I just picture Twitter like this. Dartboard. Help me, please. That's how I picture Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter is kind of, I think Twitter is kind of just all about being authentic.
I don't know. There's a lot of fake people, figuratively and literally on Twitter.
Yeah, but the thing with Twitter is that you don't build a following on Twitter. You're like a one-hit wonder on Twitter.
Okay. Yeah, that one thing goes viral. You get that one thing with 10,000 likes, and you're like, oh, loyalty. What about YouTube?
Yeah, and then your next post gets like no likes.
What about YouTube? Speaking of YouTube. That YouTube algorithm, you gotta be corporate media, I know. But other than that, what's the secret of YouTube?
Secret of YouTube is number 1, to be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And number 2, to hop on trends. And I think that is kind of how back in like 2014, how beauty gurus became so popular was that beauty gurus started doing tags. So they'd be like, this is the Winterlicious tag, and they'd answer a bunch of questions about winter. And then you could search up Winterlicious, and there'd be a million different videos about it. And so the biggest thing with YouTube is hopping on trends.
Okay. All right. I have learned so much. So you've answered a lot of my questions about guests. How do you formulate questions for your guests?
I kind of follow the same formula every time I have guests on my show. It's, where did you go to school? How did you get into PR? Walk me through your journey. And then kind of just from there, my biggest thing is like, I want it to be like a conversation. So I don't like to come up with a bunch of questions beforehand. I kind of just come up with them on the spot. I always have like a notepad with me while I'm recording, and I just kind of jot down things as this person speaks. And I kind of just think about like, what do I want to know from them? And I think that's what's gotten me pretty far, is that I'm also looking to break into the PR space. So I'm kind of in the same demographic as my listeners. So I kind of feel like I know what they want to know. And I kind of just come up with that on the spot.
I like that. I come up with a lot of mine on the spot. I mean, I do have a giant list of questions here, just in case. I go to your website, listen to your podcast, come up with questions, but a lot of them are on the spot. I kind of take a left, take a right, do an up hook, jab, whatever analogy I want to use here. But I like one day when I'm not doing these, and I have to do these in person, and I can't have questions in front of me. We'll see what happens. Hopefully when that day comes, I have a dream guest. So who is your dream guest?
I would absolutely love to have Tree Payne on my show. She's Taylor Swift's publicist. I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, so I would love to have Tree Payne on my show. But I have gotten a lot of requests for the White House Secretary of PR to come on my show, and the White House press secretary.
Jen Psaki?
Yes, and like Trump's one too, like all of that.
Oh, McEnany and the other one, what's her name? Huckabee Sanders.
Yeah, it's kind of been like every White House press secretary, people want me to talk to them because obviously there's secrets that are going to come out of that, but also they're not going to tell me their secrets. So I'm like, sorry.
No, they are going to be tight-lipped. We're going to use that word spin again. They're going to spin you around like a merry-go-round in the wind. So, but hey, it's still, if you can, it's a great get. It's a great get. It's a name. A lot of people will listen. A lot of people will watch.
Exactly.
I hope you ask the right questions though, because a lot of people who have time with them don't ask them the right questions.
Right.
That's a different podcast.
And that's the biggest thing. It's like, you have to know what they're going to answer and what they're not going to answer. And that was like, I did, when I was in college, my sorority did a Zoom interview with Christy Lucasiak from Dance Moms. And everyone was like, nope, I'm just going to ask her questions. And people are like, oh, why didn't you just like leave the show? And I'm like, guys, that's an easy question. She was contracted into the show. She couldn't just get up and leave.
It's not
like she signed a contract. I'm like, ask something insightful. I was like, as a mom, what was it like for you? Like, I know you had that contract, you couldn't leave. So as a mom, what was it like for you? Like having put your daughter in that position that you couldn't then just get out of, like, what was that experience like? I'm like asking the real questions, and then everyone's like, was Abby nice behind, like when she wasn't on camera? Like, don't ask the stupid questions.
Yeah. Well, it can be hard to formulate questions. Like I've talked to a lot of interesting people on this podcast, talking with Tarashuk from a lot of different walks of life, a lot of different spheres, but none of them by any means famous, in quote unquote. Like, right? Like if I went to like New York City and it's like, hey, do you know Phil, whatever? They'd be like, what? And then keep walking.
Mm-hmm.
So, but like, if I ever didn't know this person, I'm going to really sit down and think, what in God's name can I ask this person that they've never been asked before?
Exactly.
Like with you and PR, say, okay, I don't fully understand what PR is. Like I know what it is, but say, okay, I need to ask some questions to understand what PR is, what I find generally interesting. But what question can I ask you you've never been asked before? I don't know. Do you have any dream podcast that you want to be a guest on? Is that something you've ever been asked before?
I've never been asked that question. And if I could be on any person's podcast, I would love to be on the I Love You So Much with Kenzie Elizabeth podcast that I talked about before. Because it's a very similar concept to my show with the interviews and things like that, but also because she's an influencer that I've watched for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So I would love to kind of get the opportunity to ask her back questions, but just to like sit down and have a conversation with her.
All right. So what's next for you? 5 years, where do you see yourself?
In 5 years, I want to, in my personal life, I want to be married, and like have that figured out. In my professional life, I want to be doing PR for a top level college basketball team, or a top level program, well, on my way to kind of working with athletes building their own brands and kind of getting into the sphere of what I really want to do with having my own firm.
I love that you said you want to be married first. That's right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I would have said. Because, hey, career is great, but hey, my main goal in life is being a dad. So I love that you said that first. So 5 years, your podcast, where's your podcast going to be? Right by your side.
Yeah, in 5 years, my podcast is going to have a life of its own. We're going to have done in-person events. We're going to have had guests. And the ideal thing I really want to do is have a mentorship panel where people can sign up to get mentored by top level executives that we've interviewed on the show. All
right, Jamie. Well, I'll be here rooting for you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed these conversations about PR and podcasting industry. There's a lot of good clips and a lot of good stuff I'm going to pull from this. But before we go, last question always goes to the guest. Do you have any questions for me? If you don't, you can always plead the fifth.
So I always start my podcast with a hot seat segment where I ask people random questions.
All right, let's go.
So I can just kind of get in their head a little bit. And they're not hard questions. I know, I feel like you're so excited now. They're not hard questions. They're just kind of like icebreaker questions.
Not gonna lie, I listened to a few episodes and I was hoping this was coming. So
So I would want to ask you, if you had 1 free hour every day, how would you go ahead and spend that hour?
Oh, man. Extra hour of sleep, for sure.
That's one I've gotten a lot lately. And it wasn't something I got a lot at the beginning of the pandemic because we all had this time in the world to do whatever we wanted. Mm-hmm. And now everyone's like, can I just sleep?
It's either that or if it was an hour that like I knew wouldn't affect me, I would spend it reading. I do not do enough reading. I want to read more because like reading generally makes you more intelligent, whether it's like fiction, nonfiction, biography, whatever. I want to spend more time reading. It's just I have so much stuff to do. I want a fucking business here and work a regular job, so it's hard. But definitely sleeping or reading.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with the reading thing. I used to read so much, and especially when I was in between graduating college and starting my job, I read so many books, and now my Kindle has been sitting on my night table dead for like 3 months.
I got a full bookshelf of books just yelling my name. I'm looking at it right now.
So you're a physical book reader?
Yeah, I don't do the Kindle. It's funny, right? I do podcasts. I listen to a bunch of podcasts. Can't do audiobooks either. I need to physically read the book.
I can't do audiobooks, but I like my Kindle because I like to read in bed, and then I don't have to worry about like a book light or anything like that. And I also like to read in my pool, and my Kindle is waterproof and books are not waterproof.
That's fair. All right. All right. Any more speed round questions, or is that all you got?
That's all I got.
That's all I got. All right. That's totally fine. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been Jamie Goerke from the Touching Base PR Edition podcast. Jamie, thank you so much for being a guest on the Ambiguous Podcast Solution. Please tell everyone where they can find you, the podcast, anything you want to plug, my friend. The floor is yours.
Oh, so fun. Thank you so much for having me. You can find me on Instagram. My Instagram is at Jamie in JPEGs, kind of like JPEG, like a picture. And my TikTok is Jamie in Motion. I think that's really funny. Like one's in pictures, one's in motion. And then our podcast Instagram is at Touching Base PR. And that's where you will find all the links to the rest of our episodes in our show and our website. So definitely that is probably the go-to if you are looking for the Touching Base PR Edition podcast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, one more time. That is Jamie Goerke from the Touching Base PR Edition podcast. And my podcast is the Ambiguous Podcast Solution. And I am Will Tarashuk, as T's and Thomas, ARASHUK. Anything and everything from this podcast, as well as all of our other podcasts, can be found wherever podcasts are available, as well as ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com. Head over there, find out more from all about us, this podcast, my other podcast, Talking with Tarashuk. Head over there. If you hit that donation tab and give me $5, I would truly appreciate it. All that money goes to our nonprofit. That's probably something to be set up at this point, but it will go there. Donations to help the business grow is greatly appreciated. All of our other podcast partners, including the Pitches podcast, the Autism Rocks and Rolls, if you're going to him, it goes to his nonprofit. 100% of the proceeds go straight to his nonprofit. So instead of sending $5 to me, send $5 to him. AmbiguousPodcastSolutions.com. If you want to be a guest on this podcast, make sure you reach out to me at will@apspodcast.com. That's APSPODCAST.com. I like saying .com like that. It's a lot of fun. And I'll get you on. I'll be a guest on the show. So we link to your podcast, why you want to be on. And if I find you interesting, congratulations. You're on the podcast. You have a conversation just like Jamie and I did. It's about PR. Congratulations. You're on. But until next time, I'll be back, because I am Will Tarashuk, the founder of Ambiguous Podcast Solutions, with a brand new podcast, talking to a brand new guest with brand new content. And we'll see you there. Thank you all very much.